Little girl in dirty clothes entered one of the city's most luxurious banks holding a black card. Everyone looked stunned. As she approached the counter, she said with a timid voice, "Sir, I would like to look at my balance and make a withdrawal." The manager laughed, and humiliated her in front of rich customers, saying that the card was a toy. Each laugh hurt more, but what no one there imagined was that the girl was not wrong. And when the truth came to light, silence would take over the bank and leave everyone speechless. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to our channel. We are dedicated to bringing to life the memories and voices that often go unheard. Stories that carry the wisdom of a lifetime and the power to change how we see the world. Now let me tell you this story from the very beginning. The revolving doors of the Royal Vanguard Bank did not just turn, they glided. Heavy, glass-encased, and rimmed with polished brass, they served as the gateway to a world that very few were invited to enter. This was not your average neighborhood bank. Situated in the heart of the financial district, surrounded by skyscrapers that pierced the clouds, Royal Vanguard was a fortress of wealth. Inside, the atmosphere was intimidatingly perfect. The floors were paved with Italian Calicotta marble, polished to such a mirror-like sheen that you could see the reflection of the crystal chandeliers hanging from the vaulted ceiling. The air was conditioned to a crisp, sterile cold, a temperature that kept the wealthy comfortable in their cashmere coats and three-piece suits. The silence was heavy, broken only by the soft clicking of expensive heels, the rustle of currency, and the low, murmuring hum of high-stakes business deals. The clientele here didn't just have money, they had power. Businessmen with Patek Philippe watches that cost more than a house checked their phones with bored expressions. Ladies draped in designer silk, clutching limited edition handbags, whispered discreetly to personal bankers. It was a place where appearance was everything, and poverty was a concept discussed only in board meetings about tax-deductible charities. And it was into this cathedral of capitalism that Isabella walked. Isabella was 9 years old, but she looked smaller. Her hair was a tangled mess of brown curls that hadn't seen a comb in days. Her face was smudged with soot and street dust. She wore a faded, oversized t-shirt that hung off her bony frame and shorts that were frayed at the hems. Her knees were scraped and scabbed, evidence of a childhood spent on rough pavement. On her feet, she wore a pair of sneakers that were 3 sizes too big, the soles flapping slightly with every step. But in her small, grubby hands, she held something that defied all logic, something that caught the light as she stepped into the grand lobby. A black card. It wasn't just a credit card. It was the Obsidian, a legendary piece of anodized titanium issued only to the ultra-elite. It was a card with no spending limit, a symbol of infinite resources. As Isabella stepped onto the marble floor, the atmosphere in the bank shifted. It started with the security guard near the entrance. He stiffened, his hand hovering near his belt, his eyes narrowing. Then, the receptionist looked up, her perfectly applied lipstick forming a grimace of confusion. The eyes of the customers followed. First, they were discreet glances over the tops of newspapers. Then, they became shameless stares. A woman in dark sunglasses nudged her friend, whispering something behind her hand. A man in a red silk tie let out a scoff, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. What is this street urchin doing here? The question hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Isabella felt the weight of their gazes. She felt the heat rising in her cheeks, burning beneath the dirt on her face. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Every instinct in her body told her to run, to flee back to the safety of the invisible corners of the city. But she didn't. She couldn't. She had a mission. She walked past the velvet ropes, her oversized shoes squeaking on the marble. She went straight to the automated teller machine, ATM, in the corner. She had to stand on her tiptoes just to reach the slot. With trembling fingers, she tried to insert the heavy metal card. Beep, beep, beep. The machine made a harsh rejection noise and spat the card back out. Isabella frowned. She wiped the card on her dirty shirt, thinking maybe it was just a smudge. She tried again. Beep, beep, beep. Card read error. She tried a third time, shoving it in with a bit more force, desperation starting to well up in her throat. Nothing. The machine wouldn't take it. She took a deep, shaky breath. She knew what she had to do. She turned around and faced the expanse of the bank. The teller counters were daunting, high walls of mahogany and glass. She walked toward the main desk, leaving faint, muddy footprints on the pristine white floor. Each footprint was a violation of the sanctity of the bank, and the staff watched them appear with horror. She arrived in front of Julian Sterling, the branch manager. Julian was a man who prided himself on his appearance. His suit was tailored in London, his hair was gelled to perfection, and his tie was a shade of blue that matched his cold, judgmental eyes. He was busy typing on his computer, reviewing a portfolio for a client worth millions, when he sensed a presence. He looked down, way down, over the edge of his mahogany desk. He saw Isabella. "Sir, please." Isabella's voice was small, timid, but clear. It was the voice of a child who had learned to be polite to survive. "I would like to check my balance and make a withdrawal." Julian blinked. He looked around the lobby, checking to see if this was some sort of prank. He saw the other customers watching, amused grins on their faces. He felt a sudden need to perform, to assert his authority. He let out a laugh. It wasn't a warm laugh. It was a loud, barking sound that echoed off the high ceilings. It was a laugh designed to make the person on the receiving end feel like they were nothing. "Little girl," Julian said, his voice dripping with condescension. "This is a bank. It is not a playground, and it is certainly not a shelter. You are lost. Where is your mother?" Isabella swallowed hard. "I'm not playing, sir. I really need to use this. I want to see my balance and withdraw a little money. I need to buy a doll." The word doll was the catalyst. Julian threw his head back and laughed even harder. "A doll! Did you hear that, ladies and gentlemen?" He projected his voice so the entire lobby could hear. "She wants to withdraw money for a doll." The bank erupted in chuckles. The wealthy patrons found it hilarious. It was a grotesque scene. Grown adults, draped in luxury, laughing at a 9-year-old girl in dirty clothes. "Look at this," Julian continued, standing up now to fully address his audience. "The charity cases are getting bold, aren't they? Coming into the Royal Vanguard to play pretend. How cute." Isabella felt tears prick the corners of her eyes. She bit her lip to stop it from trembling. The shame was a physical pain, a tightness in her chest that made it hard to breathe. "Sir, I'm not kidding," she insisted, her voice trembling. "This card is real." She held the black titanium card up as high as she could. Julian didn't even reach for it. He just glanced at it with a sneer. "Put that away before you hurt yourself, kid." "What is that? A toy from a cereal box? Or did you steal it from a trash can?" He leaned over the counter, his face twisting into a scowl. "These plastic toys don't work here. Now get out. Go play in the gutter where you belong. This is a serious establishment for serious people." 2 large security guards in dark suits had already approached, their shadows looming over Isabella. She clutched the card to her chest. She looked from the manager to the guards, then to the laughing customers. "But sir, please!" "Enough!" Julian slammed his hand on the desk. The sound silenced the lobby. "You are disturbing my clients. You are dirtying my floor. Get out immediately before I call the police. And frankly, what kind of terrible mother lets a child go out looking like that?" The air in the room seemed to freeze. At that exact moment, the heavy double doors at the main entrance swung open, but this time they didn't just glide. They seemed to part way for a force of nature. Victoria Halloway entered the bank. Victoria was 60 years old, but she moved with an energy that defied her age. She had silver hair cut in a sharp, elegant bob, and she wore a cream-colored coat that likely cost more than Julian's car. She walked with a cane, not out of necessity, but as an accessory of authority. She was not just a customer, she was the owner, the founder, the CEO, and the matriarch of the Halloway financial empire, which owned the Royal Vanguard Bank. She had been outside on an urgent call regarding a merger in Tokyo, and she was returning to sign the papers. The first thing she saw was the muddy footprints. The second thing she saw was the crowd of amused onlookers. The third thing she saw was the little girl, standing alone, trembling, surrounded by towering security guards and a sneering manager. Victoria's heart stopped. A cold dread washed over her, followed immediately by a white-hot rage. She recognized the card in the girl's hand instantly. "What is going on here?" Victoria's voice was not loud, but it cut through the silence like a razor blade. It was a tone that had brought CEOs to their knees and ended careers. The laughter in the room died instantly. The silence that followed was terrifying. Julian froze. He recognized the voice. He turned pale, his arrogant smile vanishing instantly. He cleared his throat, adjusting his tie nervously. "Mrs. Halloway, I didn't expect you back so soon." He tried to regain his composure. "We just had a little situation. A street urchin wandered in, disturbing the peace. She was trying to use a fake card. I was just removing her." Victoria didn't look at him. She walked past him as if he were a piece of furniture. She walked straight to Isabella. The little girl looked up, her eyes filled with tears that were finally spilling over, carving clean tracks through the dirt on her face. "Isabella, my darling," Victoria said, her voice softening into something unrecognizable to her employees. Pure, unadulterated love. "What happened?" Isabella sniffled, wiping her nose with her sleeve. I tried to use the machine, Auntie Vicky, but it wouldn't work, so I asked the man for help. But he laughed at me." Isabella pointed a small, shaking finger at Julian. "He said the card was a toy. He said I was dirty. He said I should go play in the gutter." Every word was a nail in Julian Sterling's coffin. The entire bank was silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. The wealthy clients, who moments ago were laughing, now looked at the floor, suddenly finding the patterns in the marble very interesting. Victoria slowly stood up. She turned to face the room. She looked at the security guards, who immediately stepped back, heads bowed. She looked at the receptionist. And then she fixed her gaze on Julian. "I am going to tell you all a story," Victoria announced. Her voice echoed off the vaulted ceiling. "A story that none of you know, because you only see what you want to see." She took a step forward, her cane tapping rhythmically on the floor. 3 years ago, I suffered a stroke. It was mild, but it left the left side of my body paralyzed for months. I had to relearn how to walk. I was vulnerable. Weak." She paused, letting the information sink in. "One afternoon, I was trying to cross the street a few blocks from here. The intersection was busy. The light was green for pedestrians, but I was slow. My leg gave out. I froze in the middle of the street. The light turned red. Cars started honking. A taxi driver screamed at me to move. I was terrified. I couldn't move." Victoria looked at Isabella, a soft smile gracing her lips. And then, out of nowhere, a little girl appeared. She was barefoot. She was wearing a shirt full of holes. She ran into the traffic, took my hand and said, "Don't worry, ma'am, I've got you." A gasp rippled through the crowd. She guided me to the sidewalk. She saved me from being run over. When I sat down on a bench to catch my breath, I asked her name. She said, "Isabella." I asked where her parents were. She said she didn't have any. She lived in a cardboard box under the highway overpass. Victoria placed a protective hand on Isabella's shoulder. "This girl, the one you just mocked, the one you laughed at because her face is dirty and her clothes are old. This girl is my daughter, my adopted daughter, and the sole heir to the Halloway fortune." Julian looked like he might faint. His skin had taken on a grayish, sickly hue. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. "Isabella wanted to be independent today," Victoria continued, her voice gaining strength. "She asked if she could come to the bank alone to make a withdrawal with the card I gave her last week, the family card. She wanted to feel like a big girl." Victoria pulled out her smartphone. She dialed a number and put it on speaker, holding it up high. "Accounts department, status check, account holder, Isabella Halloway." The voice on the other end was crisp and robotic. "Accessing, identity confirmed, Isabella Halloway, account tier Obsidian Infinite. Current available balance, $27 million. The number hung in the air, 27 million. The lady with the expensive handbag covered her mouth in shock. The man in the red tie looked as if he wanted to vanish into the wall. Julian gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles white. Isabella looked up at the manager with her big brown eyes. She didn't look angry. She just looked sad. "I just wanted to buy a doll for $50, mister," she whispered. "You didn't have to laugh at me." That sentence broke the room. It stripped away the pretense of wealth and revealed the ugliness of their behavior. Isabella turned to the crowd. She wiped her face again and spoke with a wisdom that far exceeded her 9 years. "Do you know what I learned living on the street?" she asked the silent room. "I learned that you can't tell who is important by their clothes. You can't tell by their shoes. You can't tell by their cars." She looked straight at Julian. "You see people with your heart. You see who they are by how they treat people who can't give them anything in return. There are people who wear suits and are poor in spirit. And there are people who sleep under bridges who have hearts of gold." The silence was absolute. It was a heavy, shameful silence. Victoria took a deep breath. She turned to Julian. The fire in her eyes was cold and deadly. "Julian Sterling." "Mrs. Halloway, please, I didn't know." Julian stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "I swear, if I had known she was your daughter." "That," Victoria interrupted, her voice sharp as a whip, "is exactly the problem. You didn't know she was my daughter, but you knew she was a child. You knew she was asking for help. And instead of kindness, you chose cruelty. You chose to perform for an audience." Victoria stepped closer to him. "There is no room in my company for people who lack basic humanity. You are fired, effective immediately, for cause. But my pension, my reputation." "Get out," Victoria said quietly, "before I have security throw you out." Julian looked around for support, but the customers avoided his gaze. He realized he was alone. He grabbed his briefcase, his hands shaking, and walked out of the bank. He walked past Isabella, unable to even look at her. He left with his head low, carrying a shame that no amount of money could fix. Victoria wasn't done. She pointed to the 2 security guards. "You stood by and watched. Turn in your badges." She pointed to the receptionist. "You laughed. Pack your things." 5 employees lost their jobs in the span of 3 minutes. The news of what happened at Royal Vanguard Bank spread like wildfire. By evening, it was trending on social media. By the next morning, it was on the front page of the newspapers. Bank CEO fires staff for humiliating adopted daughter. But instead of a scandal, it became a movement. People praised Victoria's integrity. They saw that the bank stood for something real. Deposits actually increased. The reputation of the bank soared. But the most beautiful part of the story happened an hour later. Isabella and Victoria left the bank hand in hand. They walked down the street, ignoring the staring crowds, and went into a small toy store on the corner. Isabella ran to the aisle she had been dreaming of. She picked out the doll she wanted. It wasn't a fancy electronic toy. It was a simple doll with yarn braids and a yellow dress. It cost exactly $50. Isabella placed her black card on the counter. The cashier, a young woman who had already seen the news on her phone, smiled warmly and treated Isabella like royalty. "Here you go, sweetheart," the cashier said, handing her the receipt. Isabella beamed. Later that afternoon, Victoria and Isabella sat on a park bench in the city center. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the skyscrapers. Isabella hugged her new doll tightly to her chest. Victoria wrapped her arm around the little girl. They sat there in silence, just enjoying the moment. A billionaire businesswoman and a former street child. 2 people from opposite worlds who had saved each other. In the months that followed, Isabella became a fixture at the bank. Victoria even gave her a title, Director of First Impressions. Isabella's job was simple. She would tell Victoria how people treated her. Victoria implemented a new training program. Every employee, from the janitor to the executives, had to undergo training on empathy and inclusion. A plaque was placed in the lobby of every branch of Royal Vanguard Bank. It read, "Respect lives in every face, even the most unlikely." And as for Julian, rumor has it he struggled to find work in the financial sector. His reputation preceded him. Eventually, he found a job as a clerk at a busy municipal office in a different state. He spends his days standing behind a counter, dealing with long lines, frustrated people, and being ignored by those who think they are better than him. He learned, in the hardest way possible, that life is full of ironies, and that the wheel always turns. Isabella is still a child. She still likes to play in the dirt, she still scrapes her knees, and she still wears comfortable sneakers. But now she is respected. She is protected. She is loved. And above all, she never forgot who she was. She is still that little girl with the big heart who saw an old woman struggling in the street and offered her hand without expecting anything in return. So, what did you think of this story? It reminds us that true wealth isn't what you have in your pocket, it's what you have in your heart. If this story touched you, please leave a comment below telling us which city you are watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and activate the notification bell so you never miss a story. A big hug to you all, and until the next story.